So when you guys were saying that this arc was really trippy and had a lot of mind fuckery, I guess you could call it, I thought I had seen the extent of that last chapter with just this grand reality bending location. But it's now apparent to me that you guys weren't talking about just the location, that's for sure. After this chapter, I have so many questions regarding the rules of this world, questioning things that I thought I already had a grasp on, but now I realize, wait, maybe not all of that is 100% concrete. And most of all, these designs. These character designs are insane. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage and welcome back to another Made in Abyss chapter review. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 40, A Life's End Result. And this is one of the few chapter names I've come across recently while reading the manga that after reading the chapter, I'm not really sure exactly what this is referring to. I would guess it's referring to these hollows and what their life's end result ended up being by the end of their journey of challenging the abyss. Now, more than any story or plot details that I want to focus on, the main thing that I just want to spend a little bit discussing is just this location. As we enter through this hole that we discovered last chapter, we find a place called Narehate Village, or Hollow Village as it will likely be translated, or maybe Hollowed Village. I'm wondering how they'll translate that. But this has easily got to be one of the coolest places I've seen in fiction in quite some time. This place is just absolutely gorgeous. And other than just being straight up gorgeous, the location itself is just so imaginative. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before. I actually am, however, getting Black Mage Village from Final Fantasy IX vibes from this place. I am totally getting those vibes. Black Mage Village looks nothing like this. I'm talking more so in tone and just the characters that we meet here. Total Black Mage Village vibes. Either way though, we get a clear look at what this structure is that we saw last chapter, and it turns out to be what looks like this giant tree. But what's more interesting about it is that at the bottom where the roots should be, Reg speculates that it almost looks like a creature's corpse at the bottom. What this could mean for the future, I don't know. Maybe it has no meaning and it's just there for cool world building, which in that case, mission accomplished. It's really fucking cool. I just wonder if that'll come into play at all, this entire structure actually being a creature's corpse. What's even more interesting about this place though, other than the fact that it just looks cool, are the people inside this village. We see some of the most unique and creative designs Akihito has shown in this entire series so far. And that is a high bar considering I've loved every single one of the White Whistle designs. Just all manner of different looking characters we see inside of this village, some of which appear to have intelligence and others don't. But probably the most fascinating aspect about these characters is not their design, but their lifestyle and the way that they choose to live in this place. We learn that this is a place that treasures value itself, which might sound repetitive to say, but it essentially means that they're willing to barter for what they specifically find value in. For example, you'll see some characters that are bartering for small things crawling over their body, bartering for tubes going through their body, bartering for being able to tear bodies apart. They have a thing for bodies, sure, but the main thing to take away from this is that this is a society that lives by their values above anything else. So when we learn that stealing value is the heaviest sin to this place, it's made very apparent that the thief who stole Pushka is not here. And when I read that line, it almost felt like this genre of the story of this arc turned into a crime thriller or something similar to that kind of storyline, which I am so down. I'm down that Akihito has transformed each arc almost into a different tone. My initial confusion came from the fact that these hollows here look so much different from what we've seen of hollows back on the 5th layer with Bondrewd's experiments. Every single hollow here almost, they have just such unique and wild designs versus the hollows that we saw in Bondrewd's base and his experiments, in which they all looked the same. They all looked like MIDI creatures. And I'm not sure if we really got a concrete explanation for why this is yet. The only thing I can gather from what was said in this chapter is that there was mention of Edofront as the old ritual site. Keyword there being old. My only explanation for why they look different is because that was the old ritual site and they have apparently a new ritual site which changes their appearances much more drastically. That's my only explanation. I do have a few more thoughts on that in a bit, but I'll get into that later. I also noticed that a lot of these hollows here in Narayate Village, and yes, I'm going to keep interchanging the words just to mess with you guys, is that while some hollows still had their intelligence and their consciousness, something that we've only seen from the likes of Midi so far, there are others here who seem to be almost as mindless and instinctual as the Midi blobs back at Edofront. Why this is, I have no idea. Again, there's so many questions involving this whole hollow process, and it's about to get even more confusing. But yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe it's more rare for the other hollows to have kept their intelligence, or maybe they experienced the same thing Nanachi did, where somebody gave them their blessing and they retained their intelligence. I don't know. But here's where things get really interesting. We learn from a new character, Majikajia, that hollows take the form of their desires. Everyone who turned into a hollow formed into this shape that more or less reflected their desires, and we see that with some of the hollows that I mentioned, like the ones who want tubes through their body or want small things crawling over their body, etc, etc. So again, why did the Midi-like hollows back on the 5th layer look all the same? My only other guess for that is that maybe because it was almost an artificial transformation into a hollow, that they all reflected and transformed in the same way. That is my only guess, and I'm not sure why that would affect them in that way, because they're still experiencing the curse the same way that somebody here on the 6th layer would. They're just being subjected to it against their will. Maybe it's because they're being subjected to it against their will that they're not transforming into their natural desires. Anyways, I mentioned a new hollow, a new character introduced in this chapter called Majikajia. I'm just gonna call him Kaja from now on. We learn later on that he actually wants one whole child. He mentions the value of children as a whole. He says human children are the most valuable here. Their eyes, their skin, their fat, everything. And what I'm wondering is this Kajia's desire and who he is and what he wants? Or are human children actually universally valuable to everybody in this society? And if so, why? My speculation here is that Kaja might want a whole child, so he has a living body to transfer into, I guess? He says that he doesn't want to be trapped in a container, and that he wants his own body. So that's my guess as to why he'd want a whole child, is to somehow plant his consciousness or soul into a body. But of course, Riko denies him and says, no, I don't want that. I'm continuing to the bottom of the abyss. And that is where we learn that he's not going to try anything funny. He's not going to attack the group or anything, because stealing value is the heaviest sin that you can commit. An interesting note about Kaja is that apparently he's formed entirely by smells. Now what this means, I could not tell you at all. I don't know how that works, but according to him, he's made up entirely of smells trapped in a container that allows him to have a consciousness and will. This makes me wonder if the other hollows around the village are also formed by senses. Maybe one is entirely made up of sounds or sight, I don't know. But I think this adds an entirely new dimension to the entire hollow Narayate process, is that apparently some hollows can be created purely by one sense of the self. Backing up a bit, as soon as we enter this village and we follow Kaja to wherever he's taking us, we discover that the life reverberating stone, that Pushka, has actually been brought here. And we see a smith chipping away at her and carving her out as we speak. Now for one, this tells us that the person who brought Pushka here was simply looking for some kind of payment. Maybe they came to barter it off here. Although it's strange that the hollow, especially Kaja, didn't question that the life reverberating stone belonged to Riko. He just said, oh, I know where it is, it's right over here. And that's weird because he said before that stealing value is the heaviest sin that you can commit. So why was he okay with whoever stole Pushka bartering it off here? You'd think he'd at least show a little bit of anger or discomfort, saying, oh wow, that was stolen from you? I'm sorry. Either way, we see Pushka being worked on, ready to turn into a fully formed white whistle. I cannot wait. I'm really excited to see the shape and what we can do with it in the future. That's going to be so cool. But what was most surprising about this scene is we get one shot while this dude is working on Pushka, turning her into a white whistle. We see a shot of the wall and we just see tons of whistles decorating it. And I don't think it's far-fetched at all to assume that those are all white whistles in themselves, meaning they've had a surplus of life reverberating stones to work with here. I'm guessing that they're just useless because nobody except for the person the sacrifice was committed for can actually use it. But it's just really interesting to see that so many white whistles are formed here, because before this point, they were made out to be a very rare item. And finally, at the very end of the episode, probably the most shocking moment of the entire chapter, scratch that, easily the most shocking moment of the chapter, the most random moment of the chapter as well, Mania, I think, is dead. Akihito legit killed off Mania 2 chapters after we got her. What did we do to deserve this? Now, we don't see for sure that Mania is dead, but it is heavily implied by the way that this chapter ends, the sound effect, the snapping sound effect, that Mania is just dead. It had its spine broken, we're done. The question is why? Are these hollows actually sentient, or were they just mindlessly playing with it to the point where it died? Or did they intentionally kill this thing? What was the purpose of this? This is clearly setting up that the rest of these hollows aren't exactly friendly, but they don't seem to bother the humans. They don't seem to bother Riko, Reg, and Nanachi. It was only Mania. So do they not have respect for creatures, but they do have some sort of respect for these humans? Or are they suddenly gonna turn on us? Or what's going on here, guys? I'm very curious about the way this is going to go. Rest in peace, Mania. I'm so sorry. I'm praying that you're not actually dead next chapter, but I'm not holding out hope. And that's pretty much the bulk of what I wanted to talk about in this chapter review. But there are a few extra notes that I do want to make. For one, as the group is entering Narehate village and going through this hollow, going through this tree, across the bridge, we see that there's a creature on the other side, back where they started, watching them as they cross this bridge into the village. And it almost looks like a ghost. I'm not really sure what to make of this. If this is actually the thief that stole Pushka, or if this is some outside party, I don't know. But that character will absolutely play a part in a future chapter, so I'm wondering what's going to go on there. I'm excited to see what happens. And final note I'd like to make, on the final page, we get another look into these 2 characters that we saw last chapter, back up on Earth, called Sharumi and Mene, or one of you told me it's not Mene, it's like Menae. I don't know, guys. I really don't. Anyways, we see these characters talking about the Abyss language, and previously we knew the Abyss language as the Netherglyphs, or the Abyssal writings. But they seem to be discussing newly discovered characters from the Abyss, characters that are still considered part of the Abyssal language, but that have just been discovered much more recently, called Beyond Glyphs, or distant writings. And we see a lot of the words that they're discussing are things that have been said in this chapter from Kazuya himself. And while some don't really have much meaning to them other than basic words, there is one word in particular that seems pretty important, called Iruburu. And even they talk about this character and they say, this one seems to have a complex meaning. It's unknown. And during this chapter, we see Kazuya saying that he wants to show Riko and the group Kazuya's Iruburu. And maybe I'm just looking a little bit into it, but that sounds like heavy foreshadowing for events to come. I have a feeling that this is going to be very important to the grand story of this arc. But that's been all for me for this chapter review for Made in Abyss. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. There was a lot to speculate on in this episode, and this is going to be probably one of the most interesting chapters to hear your guys' thoughts on, because a lot of my speculation on this could be different from what you guys think, and I could see a lot of your guys' explanations persuading me over to a different line of thinking for some of the things that are going on here. So thank you guys again for the support, for liking the video, for commenting on the video, and giving me all your thoughts every single week. It's always so nice. Love reading your guys' comments and responding to them, and look forward to more. And of course, as usual, Have a great day.